Hello, this is Valerie Moore from the Frederian Gazette. Thank you for joining us this rainy Wednesday evening. Whether you're on your way home from the office, running an errand, or just need a friendly voice to listen to, we're happy you chose to listen to our reenactment of the controversial book, Say I Sue Them Not, written by Kingsley Montefello, edited by Alexander Phillips, and narrated by Pepper Holloway. If you've enjoyed our program so far and want to support independent journalism, please donate to our Ko-Fi at www.kofi.com/thefrederian-gazette. Content warnings for this episode include white people failing to understand colonialism, references to colonial violence, police brutality, and war.
This program has been sponsored by Miriam's Deli. Half-off deal every Tuesday. That's right, half-off deal every Tuesday. Get a cup of soup, half a sandwich, and fries for $3.99, only at Miriam's Deli.
We now pass the mic to Pepper Holloway, who will be reading
Honorable Lyle Byrdwin urges Hevian president to call in the army to deal with a cartel protesting Kingsley's trial.
Entry from Alexander's Journal, August 4th, 1875.
I met Margaret and Devin at the Rouge Pheasants Bar. The fact that the hotel is owned by an cartel couple seems to comfort them. Besides my daily protesters, who have not abated in the slightest despite my expectations, no one else bothers the hotel. I wonder if the owner pays for protection. There are rumors that the ILA have returned, but there are also rumors that Resin's been resurrected, so who knows. It was good to see Devin again. Out of all of Dad's political allies, I've always liked Devin best, and sometimes felt angry at Dad for pushing him into politics. He's too good for the bullshit that is the Frederian Congress, let alone the international disaster this trial is becoming. I should have told him to go home, but selfishly, I'm relieved I'm no longer alone. Margaret was standoffish, but that's just her way. She believes the only beings you can truly trust are your own, and who am I to challenge such a mindset? Although I wonder how she aligns that belief with what happened to Marcus and Carrie. Devin has completely lost sight in his right eye and consequently knocked over his chair when he tried to sit down, as well as his glass, no matter where we put it. Other than that, though, he hasn't changed much from when I last saw him. It got to age so slowly and almost imperceptibly, I don't think I'll notice any major changes until I'm on my deathbed, and Devin's still considered middle-aged. Margaret seems to have gained more muscles than when we last met. She still enjoys working the dots and impatiently showed off a handful of new ornate stars as we waited for Caroline's arrival. Neither Margaret nor I had much hope of Caroline appearing, but Devin was adamant we wait for her. He truly believes they can't quote-unquote stop this without her. I asked about Amy and Pip, who is expecting his first child, and Devin's extensive family, although I'll admit I can't keep track of who's dead and who's living. Margaret's son is still practicing medicine in Appleburg and is dating a Minotaur. He hasn't introduced his boyfriend to Margaret yet, much to her annoyance. Devin was kind enough to bring me news about Mustafa, Christine, and the rest of the family. He even stopped by my parents' place before making the trip. Everyone is doing well, even Christine. Thank God. Devin warned me that Mustafa was being pressured to take over Kingsley's prosecution, but I know he'll refuse. Things have only gotten worse since the last time they asked, and he has a family now. His daughter Nazima is a true wild child, a lot like Asia, Devin added with a wistful smile. I regret not being there for them as they arranged a hasty marriage and went through the painful adoption process. They started the process right before Christine. I'm missing so much. And for what? What are any of us doing here? We were on our second round of drinks when Caroline, dressed in black from head to toe, walked in, bringing the chilly wind and teeming rain with her. She hung her dripping umbrella and rubber coat and barely took a step forward before Devin pulled her into a tight and spinning hug. He put her down with a sheepish smile, and they spoke to each other in Itali. Devin offered his arm and led her to our table. Caroline warmly greeted Margaret first, the pair holding each other's hands for a long moment before parting. I rose to reintroduce myself, and Caroline asked about Christine. Margaret immediately got to business, demanding I explain why we're publishing Kingsley's memoir. Don't you know you're just feeding the flames? She's right, of course, which is why Kingsley agreed to our arrangement. He knew the only way to save his life was to incite so much violence and instability that the court would be terrified of killing him in case it sparked a third world war. I am just his ever-reliable puppet. I defensively snapped that someone was going to tell Kingsley's story, so why not me? A typical answer for an amoral journalist who doesn't care about anything except the story. At least I'm true to the character. Devin interceded, claiming it was nothing more than a misguided attempt to resist Hevian propaganda. He claimed that I knew better than to trust the prosecution's or defense's story, nor would I be foolish enough to trust anything written by Hevian scholars and veterans. Sure, it was a foolish thing to publish Kingsley's memoir, but I was only an ignorant Frederian. Ever well-meaning, ever clueless, ever destructive. He ended his defense by personally vouching for me, and it affected me in an unexpectedly strong way, as if one of Amel's own disciples proclaimed me pure. While Margaret and Caroline continued to treat me with wary disdain, they trusted Devin enough to move on to the main point of business. The trio shares the paranoid belief that the Hevians pressured the International Court to try Kingsley now because the new Hevian president is a unionist quote-unquote asshole who wants an excuse to restart the Itatel-Hevian War. They picked the most polarizing Itatel still alive to try for war crimes, and fake astonishment when it revives all the old assholes? Margaret angrily told me, bullshit. They want an incident, so they can roll back Itatel rights in Hiva, forcing Cathal to intervene or risk being vilified and losing his re-election. Cathal would rather destroy his reputation as an Itatel hero than start a war, Devin solemnly told me. Margaret pointed out that he'd have to respond if the real children of Hiva launched terrorist attacks in Kilbraga. I told them the real children was a purely political entity now, and even Devin looked at me with disgust annoyance. They spoke to each other in Itali, and while I still can't speak the language, I understood Margaret was complaining about me. I tried to save myself by apologizing and asking if there were still ILA and IFM cells. Devin vehemently shook his head, while Margaret told me there weren't any active cells, but there were always Itatel who were willing to join the ranks of Kilbrada's defenders. I offered many arguments as to why their theory was unlikely. These arguments ranged from Hiva's inability to wage, let alone win, another continental war, to the protective guarantees between Kilbrada and Hiva, to the growing international disgust with all things Hevian. Now was hardly an auspicious time for colonial warfare. I also addressed the growing demon presence within Berkassa itself. It would be foolish to purposely instigate a violent response with so many demons walking their streets. People made the same exact arguments in 1840, and Hiva risked continental war, Caroline told me. Gargain started the demon war. No, Alex, Devin gravely told me. It was a plot between the Hevians and Dardanians. There's a secret pact hidden within the Hevian archives. I scoffed at the popular conspiracy theory, but they insisted it was true. Margaret adding it was probably happening again with Kingsley as the trigger. Caroline claimed that the real children were most likely planning to start a riot or assassinate an important Hevian the day Kingsley's verdict was read, and then blame the Itatel, allowing the Hevian president to declare a national emergency and attack the Itatel community. It's happened before, Margaret assured me. I know I shouldn't judge. To go through everything they went through and not come out paranoid would be an impossible task. Yet, can I truly believe that the Hevian government would risk war with its neighbor after rewriting its own constitution to acknowledge Itatel rights and the independence of Kilbrada? If the Hevians attack Kilbrada, and Cathal calls upon the Alcohun and Sundaran republics for aid, it could lead to continental war. It would be suicide. Surely the Hevians have learned something from the last 5 decades. We can't be asked to sacrifice everything for nothing. Not again. Never again. I think of their various degrees of annoyed expressions, their various levels of patience, and I begin to doubt. All my life, I believed that laws matter, that governments will prioritize the needs of their people. Sure, there were bad apples, and there was corruption, but they were rare or symptoms of a sick government or society, an inherent flaw within their country that needed to be corrected. I believed a government that needlessly and carelessly sacrificed its own people for profit or grievance or to combat its own sense of inadequacy wouldn't survive for long. In the end, law and order, reason, and the need to survive would prevail. Now, I'm not as sure as I want to be. I asked them what they wanted from me. Their ask was simple. Give them the same platform as Kingsley to tell their side of the story, and to plead with the world to avoid another decade of tragedy. I know they are paranoid and fighting a decades-old war that ended years ago. I know, in reality, this trial and their fears have nothing to do with me beyond my need to pretend I'm a functional reporter. But still, I agreed to fight a war that was never mine. You've just heard Honorable Lyle Byrdwin urges Hevian president to call in the army to deal with Ilkha protesting Kingsley's trial from Say I Sue Them Not by Kingsley Montevello. Tonight's episode was read by Pepper Holloway and was sponsored by Miriam's Deli, the best place to get a sandwich since 1760. Please be sure to follow us on Instagram and Blue Sky at Frederian Gazette, and go to our website www.thefrederiangazette.com for episode extras. Join us next Wednesday at 5 p.m. for episode 13. Prosecution submits evidence of Kingsley's administration mistreating prisoners of war, including feeding POWs to the Demon Death Squads.